School of Rock. Santa Ana.
Hi, my
Hey.
name is Rachel Vennel. I'm not used to saying it without the musician second class in front of it.
This is the civilian world. You don't
I
need that title
what?
anymore. This is the civilian world. You don't have to use the official title.
I am currently a musician in the United States Navy. I am stationed in Newport, Rhode Island, at Navy Band Northeast.
Cool.
That is just kind of where I'm at right now.
Yeah.
Some of my backgrounds, I started singing when I was really young. My mom is a singer, so
Ah,
yeah,
very
started
cool.
off singing with her in the car
Oh yeah.
to Hosanna tapes, which is if you know
Oh
anything about Christian
yeah.
music.
Absolutely, man. We used to jam out to those all the time, man. Pops would play those in the car on the 8-track though, man. We were real high tech,
So that's kind of how I got my start. I can pretty vividly remember being 5 years old in the car singing along to one of those tapes and really kind of, oh, wow, I like this. I like singing. I like doing this and always admiring my mom. I have 3 brothers who all but one went to school for music.
Oh.
So out of the 4 of us, 3 of us make no money and one makes a lot of money. No, I'm just kidding. Kevin is currently a special education teacher and works in music. So he uses music a lot in his job. And then, so I looked up to him. He's about 11 years older than I am. So I looked up to him a lot too when I was growing up, just in singing in different groups and choirs and things like that. And just kind of piquing my interest of, oh, okay, yeah, I think I could do this for the rest of my life. So started off in choirs in middle school and high school, and singing on worship teams at church was a big part of my kind of upbringing.
Yeah.
And then I decided, okay, I want to do this for a living, and I went to school. So I went to University of Hartford and got my undergrad degree in music education. And then I went to Westminster Choir College in New Jersey and got my master's in voice pedagogy and performance. Pedagogy is just a fancy word for teaching.
Very fancy. Pinky's out.
Yes, it's the pinky up version.
Of course. Yeah. Can't say it without it.
And then after that, I taught for about 5 years. I taught high school choir and really enjoyed doing that, but really wanted to perform for a living. So I started looking into the different military bands, and the Navy just kind of was the one that I kind of just got enveloped in and decided to join. So I've been in the Navy band now for a little over 5 years.
Okay. How did you first hear about the military band? I mean, it's sort of a small niche of the music world. Not a lot of folks kind of know about it. Did you see them at your school, or what was your first kind of contact with the Navy band?
So I grew up in Ledger, Connecticut, which is right next to Groton, Connecticut. So that's a big naval submarine base.
Oh, okay.
So I grew up kind of around that world. And then I also grew up near the Coast Guard Academy, which is in New London.
Okay.
And they have a band.
Yeah.
And I'd seen them quite a bit. So after I finished my master's, I decided I wanted to audition. So I actually auditioned for the Coast Guard band. But they only have one vocalist.
Okay.
Super competitive.
Yeah, man, dang.
And the person they hired is a lot better than I am, so, which is totally fair. So they hired someone else, and I said, okay, I'll go teach for a little while and see where that takes me. And but I'd kind of always known. So then the Commodores in DC actually had an opening.
Oh yeah.
And I sent in an audition tape for that, and they sent back and said, hey, we're going a different direction, but we really liked your tape. We have fleet bands if you're interested.
Okay. Yeah.
And I kind of was like, all right, maybe I'll do some research. I kind of looked up some stuff about it and was like, okay, that could be kind of cool. And then just kind of put it on the back burner. And then the next year teaching, I was just like, you know what, this is like really pulling on me. I need to kind of look into this a little more. And so I called up the audition coordinator and got some more information and kind of just went from there, and it
Cool.
snowballed pretty quick.
Yeah, right on. And you auditioned, which band did you audition at?
So I actually auditioned here in
Rhode Island?
in Northeast.
Oh, okay.
So I already knew the building.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Very cool. So voice pedagogy, huh? That is a pretty fancy word. What does it mean? What did you study when you study voice pedagogy?
Sure. So most of my upbringing from undergrad to grad school is classical. That's kind of the realm that we stick with unless you decide to go the route of contemporary commercial music. So I primarily studied, the classical style of voice technique. So
opera
that's a
or
large
classical?
part of it.
Like what? Like when you say classical, you mean like arias and opera, or like what is it exactly? The canon.
Yeah. So opera arias are a big component of that, and then also art song is a big part of that. So studying in foreign languages is a huge component of what we do. So starting my freshman year of college, I was singing in Italian, French, German, Portuguese.
Very
you
cool.
name it, I've probably sung in it.
Yeah, that's a lot of the original, like that era of music had a lot of influence from many different countries, and they were writing, of course, in their native languages. So that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah,
exactly. So then in my grad work, I started to focus really in on the voice as the anatomy. So what's going on when I'm singing, what's actually happening inside. We looked at the acoustical properties. So, what makes my voice unique in comparison to somebody else's voice. Cool. And then obviously going into the actual art of teaching voice. So what are some of the things that are really vital to teach right off the bat to students? Detection. So how do I detect errors that are going on in somebody's voice and help them to fix it? Those kinds of things.
Oh, very cool. So everything all the way from basically like history of the voice and studying the music that included the voice and vocal stuff, all the way to the mechanics and how it physically works, and then how to teach and help others with music. So kind of the whole, basically anything that has to do with the voice.
Yeah.
Very cool.
And then we get a big test at the end that's called your oral exams, and they ask you anything they want.
Oh my God. Cumulative exam, on everything that ever happened with the voice.
Yeah.
Gracious.
A little stressful.
Yeah, I imagine, man. Well, congratulations on finishing that. That sounds like a beast. Right on. But now you get to call yourself a master, so that's pretty cool. Yeah.
All right.
So, and you mentioned that you're talking about the voice, and I think it's really interesting to think about the voice as an instrument, to think about the voice as something that needs training and like a muscle, although I'm not sure that that's actually correct either. What is the voice? Like, how are we creating sounds? What's the difference between like speaking and singing? How does it work mechanically?
Sure. So, starting off, kind of the difference between speaking and singing is just sustain. So how long am I actually holding out? And pitch, obviously pitch variation.
Okay.
And it's basically taking everything that an instrumentalist does, pitch, rhythm, etc., and adding it on, but adding sustain. So, we if you can talk, you can sing. I mean, that really is kind of the basis. How well you can do the singing. That's up
fair
for
enough.
debate.
Sure. Well, that takes time and effort, just like anything, right? Like you can play an instrument, or you can cook a meal, or anything that you can do. And when you start off, you're probably not particularly good at it, although some start at a different level than others. Everything takes practice and it takes effort, and you would need to study and learn and all that stuff. So everybody can sing. That's totally true. And then, if you want to get better at it, then you need to practice.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So, so as far as the instrument is concerned, we talk about all the same things we kind of talk about when we talk about wind instruments. So there's the breath source, there's the phonation, there's the vibration, all of those things. So, for singing, a lot of people like to talk about diaphragm when they're talking about singing.
Yeah,
right? So
definitely
the
heard
diaphragm
that.
is a muscle.
Yeah.
It sits underneath the lungs.
Okay.
And it's actually, I don't know the full technical term right now, but off the top of my head, because it's been a while, but it's not actually a voluntary muscle. So meaning we don't actually have direct control over the diaphragm.
Really?
So whenever somebody's like, oh, breathe from the diaphragm, I'm like, can't do that.
Or you can, but you
Um,
can't really focus it somehow. Like, cause you do
Right.
breathe. I mean, babies, like young kid, we all, right, start breathing through our diaphragm. That's like how it starts.
Well, so it's actually abdominal breathing. So
Okay.
the diaphragm sits underneath the lungs, kind of like a dome, right?
Okay.
And then when we breathe in, we need to release our abdominal muscles to bring the diaphragm down, because the abdominal muscles has connection, or excuse me, the diaphragm has connections to the abdominal muscles.
Okay.
So when you breathe in, right, and we kind of release the abdominal muscles out and allow them to relax. It allows, and I'm simplifying,
Yeah, of
not
course.
all of them relax,
Yeah,
but
of course.
it allows the diaphragm to come down, which
Okay.
allows the lungs to expand, which brings the air in.
Ah.
And the reason we talk about that in singing is because of control. So clavicular breathing is, we have the clavicle bone. When you're really tired after a run, you're gonna
you're breathing up,
right?
way up here. Yeah.
Right. And it's actually because you actually bring in more air when you're breathing clavicularly at a faster rate. And
it's higher.
so
it just has less distance to travel or something, or it's like, it just feels faster than the rest of the system. Okay.
Yeah. But when we talk about singing, it's not necessarily that we need more air, less air, whatever the case may be. It's that we need control over that air. So however much air you bring in, you want to sustain a note and you want to make it sound good, you need to have some control over how the air is being released. And we do that by controlling our abdominal muscles. So that's a big part of the breathing process when we talk about singing.
Tightening and loosening them controls the breath out. So it's not so much controlling the breath in, it's more about controlling how much and when and the duration of how long it takes to breathe them out.
Right. Exactly. Okay. So if you can keep your kind of, if this is my abdominal muscles, right? If I can keep them expanded for longer and control the inward motion and of the release of the air, that allows me to have more access to air as I'm singing.
Interesting. Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah. And then we obviously have the vibrating source, which is the vocal folds, which is the kind of new vernacular, if you will. It used to be the vocal cords.
Yeah.
Pedagogy at some point in the early 2000s was like, let's change it.
Folds.
Yeah. And it makes sense, because if you look at the anatomy, it does look like a couple of folds of muscle, essentially.
More than a cord, more than like because a cord sort of, to me, I think about like ropes or something circular, or sort of like, that's what I think of as a cord.
Right. Yeah. And so those, they come together and they vibrate kind of like, this, if you will. And the air is obviously controlling the vibration, which is what allows us to actually produce sound. Okay.
Like the pressure of the air or the flow of the air, what is it that causes them to vibrate actually?
Pressure of the air.
Pressure.
So it comes up and it kind of hits the folds and it causes them to vibrate.
So our muscles are kind of constricting those folds together, and then the pressure of the air, because it pushes through that constriction, then that's what causes it to vibrate. Is that correct? I'm just making sure I'm tracking and understanding. I'm not a voice pedagogy master.
Teaching wise, we try not to talk about, I think you used the word tension or try not to use that, just because from a teaching standpoint, we try not to use that, because then people are like, oh, so I need to tighten. But it's actually just what your body does already.
Gotcha.
You don't actually have to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. And so the higher you go, it's kind of like on a guitar, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think I'm right. The higher pitches, the strings are tighter, is that right? And looser, or tighter and smaller?
Sort of. Yes. Yeah. The tension is higher, and they are also smaller strings. Yeah. That vibrate at the higher pitches. Yeah.
So the vocal folds do the same thing, where they actually stretch and get longer and thinner, and that produces higher pitch. And then they get shorter and thicker and when you're singing lower.
Oh, that's interesting. And what controls then range? Like females are typically higher and males are typically lower, but definitely people have a wide variance in their own personal individual range. What kind of controls that, the ability that you have to have a range like that?
I'm not 100% sure about, I'm sure there's some genetic components to that.
Okay.
But I do know that it's a muscle just like any other muscle in your body. So you can train it to go different directions, but there are limitations.
Yeah.
Because some people just can't, their vocal folds just don't have the capabilities to do that. So I'm not 100% sure on the actual science behind that.
Okay.
It's interesting, actually. I kind of am curious now. I might go
Yeah.
look that up myself.
The thickness of the folds, or the ability of them to stretch, or how much material is there. Maybe you could get lower if you had more material, and like a thicker, like a larger person may have like a thicker fold or something.
It's definitely possible. I know men and women, a large part of it is the size of the actual voice box is part of that. So men's voice boxes, oh gosh, man, you're testing me.
Yeah, of course,
men's voice boxes tend to be larger.
Okay.
So that gives them some more flexibility and more capability.
More material there so they can get lower in those lower ranges. That's very interesting. Yeah, we're gonna have to go and look that stuff up and see what it is. That's what happens when you don't prepare for these things. That's what live TV is all about. We're gonna test your skills here, man.
Been 10 years now since I graduated. So.
Man, talk about use it or forget it, man. They teach you a lot of things, man. I learned a lot of things in school too, and I remember the useful things, and the things I don't use every day. Couldn't tell you. Probably never even studied them. It's like I never even went.
Like, oh, I should probably go read that book.
Yeah, absolutely. Like that was.
I remember the cool stuff.
Sure.
The first guy to ever discover what the vocal folds actually did. He took one of those. Took a cadaver.
Okay. Yeah.
Cut off the head.
Sweet.
And took a bellow. So the old fire. Things.
Fire thing. That's the technical term. Yeah. I like it. Sure.
That part I don't have to know.
No, not required.
But he blew air through the vocal folds, and that's how he kind of realized, oh, that's how it makes sound. It was a terrible noise because
you're blowing air through a dead guy's vocal folds. Can only imagine somebody walking in like, "Hey, doctor, I see you're busy. I'm gonna go ahead and come on back later."
Yeah.
Oh,
so,
man.
I remember that because that was just super interesting. And part of me kind of wanted to go down to like the medical school and be like, "Can I try this?"
Oh, y'all got any decapitated corpses down here? I got the bellows, so I brought that part. You know what I mean? Yeah, I'm good. Oh, gracious. I feel like that's a horror movie. Somebody's going to develop that into like the death singing after. Okay. All right. That's enough of that, I think. So, and then the last part that I think you mentioned earlier was some word that I forget, but that has to do with phonetics, right? Like forming then the sound.
Phonation and resonance, right? So after we talk about like we get to hear, right? And that's why we need the head. So you need a head in order to actually produce nice sound. So we have different resonating areas in our body. So in our head specifically. So we talk, an example is the nasopharynx. So from the pharynx up to the nasal passage is a resonating chamber, essentially. So sound kind of bounces around.
It's hollow or something? It's hollow and empty. Is that what makes the chamber? Okay.
Yep, exactly. And that's kind of where the sound kind of goes around and it gets produced. So there's different resonating passages. Obviously the mouth is one of them because it's a hollow when you have it open.
Sure. Yeah.
So those are some of the different things that help to produce certain sounds. Okay. And depending on where you focus your sound is kind of how your voice quality kind of comes about, just it essentially. So if you hear somebody who tends to be a little bit on the nasal side when they're singing, it's because they're focusing their sound kind of forward into those resonating passages.
It's where the sound is developing. Like after the chords have the folds have resonated, then it's like the chamber that expands that sound and allows it to kind of come out. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Interesting. And then we use our mouth or to sort of form words and stuff then, right? So that, and
Yeah.
the tongue also is kind of involved in that final stage there, right?
Yeah, so we say the tip of the tongue, the teeth, the lips, right? So,
Yeah.
so we talk about all those things when we talk about singing because they're so vital. So if if you're trying to form a specific vowel, for example, like if I'm trying to say ah, right? If I say ah with my tongue down, it's going to sound very different than if I say ah with my tongue up or ah with my tongue back. So that it creates different passageways for the sound being released, right?
Yeah.
And that's what creates the different kind of qualities.
Oh, that's very cool. Is that something then as a professional singer that you have learned to listen for in like performers that you either want to or are hired to emulate, and sort of listen for those parts and try to hear them? How are you listening for that? Yeah. How are you listening for that kind of stuff? And then how do you develop that ear for hearing those different things to be able to reproduce those sounds?
So, I mean, as far as developing the ear for it, it's a lot of listening. And I don't, I know we're going to get kind of into this, but one of the big things for me when it comes to listening to different singers and stuff, I listen to everything. I try really hard to make sure that I am getting tastes and flavors from different genres because it allows you to kind of develop a sense of understanding of what's going on.
Sure.
Diction is huge.
Okay.
So when I'm listening to, let's say, a country singer versus an R&B singer, one of the biggest differences is their diction. How are they forming the words? What emphasis are they putting? Are they giving more emphasis to the vowel or to the consonant? Things like that are really big when you're talking about different genres and understanding how those all kind of come together.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a lot of listening to, I know in college, they would put on different examples and they'd be like, well, this is an example of bright, and this is an example of nasal, and, this is an example of dark. And you kind of just start to develop an understanding of, oh, okay, that's that sound. My ear is getting that now.
Yeah. Gotcha. And so when you're listening for those things and then trying to reproduce it, because I've looked at, lyric sheets and people look at, songs in karaoke and they're sort of reading the lyrics, and it's difficult, even though the lyrics are there and you have the rhythm, even if you're like in time, the difficult part is more like how it's supposed to sound. And so that stuff I think comes from what you're talking about now, your phonation and your resonating chambers and how you're focusing your tongue or your teeth or your lips or whatever to make those specific sounds at any given time. So it's interesting to hear about how you listen for those and then how you reproduce those, because some of those things are more difficult to hear and reproduce than others, right?
Right. And I think, baseline is understanding kind of the pure vowels. And so that's why the classical stuff, a lot of people are like, oh, well, I don't want to sing classical music. And it's like, that's fine. You don't have to, right? If you want to be a vocalist who focuses on R&B, or a vocalist who focuses on jazz, or, whatever the case may be, the fundamental thing is understanding all of that stuff. So understanding how the diction is utilized in those different genres in order to really pay respect to what that genre is and do it justice, because you don't want to go up there and sing a R&B song like a country singer or vice versa, unless that's your goal.
Right. Well, and there are crossovers and that kind of thing. But but realizing, I think, that no form of music or no piece of music came from the ether. I mean, it wasn't pulled out of thin air. There's a long history of, people performing in certain ways, and then, not just predecessors of current music. I mean, you're tracking like R&B back to blues, back to jazz, that kind of stuff, but talking about the, hundreds of years of, and even not just classical music. I mean, before that, you're talking about like chanting and like, Native American music, or like singing, and a lot of it, I think, and again, I don't know this for sure, but it goes back to a lot of religious stuff. They would chant and they would have these like meditative states, and they would perform, music, not in the way that we think of performing music, but people would all be around. And that's where a lot of our, I think, group knowledge of music and how it works, harmonies and harmonizing with each other and the interaction of sounds and that kind of stuff, I think came from that even longer history than we really even think about. You can track
Right.
modern music back past like 100 years, and then maybe some of it back to like Gregorian chants and that kind of stuff, maybe at its like roots. But really behind that, there's even thousands of years of, chanting out on the range or out in the fields or whatever it was that they were doing, that's, and a lot of it, I think, too religious as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Was that something that you guys talked about at all at school, or something that like that kind of like genetic or like human kind of history of music?
Oh yeah, absolutely. My undergrad, music undergrad in general, I know even my husband, he has his undergrad degree in percussion performance. And a lot of the people I went to school with, a lot of people I know in the business, they all kind of, get a baseline of history, music history.
Yeah.
And a lot of that covers, the kind of early medieval kind of music.
Yeah.
We go through Baroque and into, the classical realm, and I skipped something, Renaissance. I skipped the Renaissance.
Sure. That huge period of time.
Yeah. Then we get, kind of into that romantic era where things start to kind of change a little bit. Harmonies start to become a little bit more complex.
Yeah.
And then we move right into that modern era, and that's when things just started kind of taking off. And a lot of that has to do really with the phonograph. Like once music was reproducible, all of a sudden, now it's not just what I can produce in my living room, you know?
Yeah, I was talking with Smo about that actually on the episode that we shot, and another one that's coming up as well, about the electrification, how electrification affected music and the voice, and specifically the voice, and then other instruments that couldn't compete. So, horns and trumpets and those kinds of instruments have been around a very long time. I mean, you read in, the Bible or other religious texts about the, horns of this town or that town, and they had trumpets and these loud blaring things because they could make a lot of sound. But until recently, in the last 100 years, with amplification and electrification, the voice required either a specifically tuned auditorium. So, in the limited amount that I have studied, like operas and stuff in my undergrad as well, the auditoriums and the theaters were crafted in such a way that voices would carry. But that's as much as they had really for amplification. And you still had to project a large amount from your body, from yourself. Until the development of the microphone, electrification, amplification, that kind of stuff. Now we can hear nuances, and you can hear these super heavy songs with this ridiculous, like either metal guitar, like these heavy beats and bass lines, and this just beautiful, pretty, breathy, airy voice on top. That's really not naturally possible physically possible,
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, it's for good and for bad. I mean, you can hear all the mistakes along the way.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but mistakes make it human. That's what makes it fun.
Yeah.
If it was all robotic, we'd just have Ableton singing for all of us. We'd just have some computer would program everything. We have those computer voices. It's called Siri.
It's true. I mean, the ability to reproduce and to kind of get music out there into the masses it's kind of like technology, right? So like in the 1980s and 90s, technology was kind of still being produced. It was still kind of coming out. It, finally got the home computer in the 1990s, and everybody was super stoked.
Sure.
And now 30 years later, I mean, we walk around with our, computers on our person all the time. Yeah. And so it's kind of like that with music, where we got the printing press. That was another huge thing for music. Because now we can replicate the sheet music. And back in the day, everybody could read sheet music.
Right. Yeah. But you had to have access to it. I mean, people could read, and people could, there was a different way of interpreting music. The Gregorian chants, you've seen the hand, and they had the different sounds and stuff. There were different ways of representing that. And then, once they were able to print and share that, then it's like, okay, now not only we're excited to learn how to read, because this is the first way we're really able to share music in that way.
Right. And, and then so with the phonograph, it's kind of the same thing. We went from people kind of having ideas locally to, oh man, like this blew up, because now I'm getting influenced by over here, and I'm getting influenced over here. And all of these different influences have now played a significant role in the music we have now.
Absolutely.
I mean, you wouldn't have the music we have today without the stuff that came before it.
There's
you
too
know?
many influences that go into it, and people try, and I mean, there are larger, and some influences are larger than others. And specifically in a lot of genres, there's like, oh, there's this guy or girl, there's this person that started this movement or doing this thing a specific way, for guitar, it's like Hendrix. And like, there are specific people that really did move the needle quite a bit. But it's impossible to talk even about those innovators and creators without their history. I mean, they were learning from people as well, and they were learning from stuff before them. And so the complexity really of modern music is almost unravelable at a certain point. You've just like gotten like, okay, we've narrowed it down to Hendrix and, a couple guys. And it's like, that's sort of become like just the standard. That's what we believe. And it's not untrue, but it's just deeper and more complicated than that,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think some of it is what's your interest? Like what are you interested in? What are the things you really want to learn?
Yeah.
But I think knowing your roots is so important. I mean, we talk about that even in just your own person, right? People are always like, oh, let me go and sign up for
Ancestry,
identity
23andMe or whatever it is. Yeah, sure.
And people are like, I want to know my roots. I want to know. And it's like, well, in music, we need to know our roots because that only makes us better. That only gives us a bigger ability to be able to, if you want to be the next innovator, right? If you want to be the next person who's like, hey, I got an idea.
This is it. Yeah.
It's all about knowing what came before so that you can be innovative.
Innovate. Yeah, absolutely.
If you don't know, you can't move forward.
How do you know? Yeah.
So
there is also that fundamental truths about how biology, in other words, you study the vocal folds and you study the air and you study the phonetics and stuff. The fundamental truth of that is that has not changed really through human evolution. And some people have genetics that make their, I was watching the Bohemian Rhapsody movie and they talk about how his like mouth is larger and he can create these phonetics and stuff. So, and as much as that is somewhat Hollywood, drama, there is a reality that different people have different resonating chambers, right? Different vocal folds, different stuff. So, but aside from small genetic variations like that, it largely functions the same for everyone. So understanding that at a base level and understanding the fundamentals of how sound works and how it's produced, and on the guitar, what the strings do and what the pickups do, and what your vocal folds do and what the drum head is for and why there are heads on these drums and what happened, all of that stuff, regardless of your genre or your taste or whatever, that is just how it functions. It's a fundamental underlying truth of the instrument.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, for me, a trained singer or a trained vocalist versus a trained singer, that's kind of a big part of it, is really understanding just the fundamentals of how the instrument works. And you don't have to know all the technical terms, like, you know what I mean? You don't have to know what the muscle is necessarily, like
the little processes and what they're called and the Latin terms for them. Yeah.
Oh, there's a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
But so there is I mean, I like that stuff. I'm a geek. I loved learning, my favorite muscle is the sternocleidomastoid, just because I loved that word. Like,
hey,
and I mean, people, I've gone out to dinner with people and I've mentioned that and they're like, wow, you're a big nerd. And I'm like, yes, I am. And I love it,
Right.
So, I mean, knowing that stuff is that gets into the weeds, right? Like, and that's for certain people, right? But at least having a fundamental understanding of how your instrument works so that you can utilize it the right way. It's vital. And it's a safety thing too. I mean, the demands of my job right now, with Corona obviously is not as high as it used to be. But, when I was stationed out in San Diego, there was one time where we did 4 back-to-back shows, and I think it was 2 2-hour and 2 3-hour shows. And
I mean, you're singing, think about singing in your shower or singing in the car or wherever you choose to sing when no one's around or listening to you. But then doing that for like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, like 10 hours straight, basically.
Yep.
Yeah.
And, if I'm not singing properly and if I'm not taking care of my voice and I'm not doing all the things that I need to do in order to maintain, then I'm not going to be able to do my job.
Yeah.
And that's really kind of the significant difference, right? Is a singer can go and sing karaoke and be
sound
fine,
good and be fine.
Have fun.
Yeah, sure. Nothing wrong
entertain
with
the
that.
crowd.
Yeah.
But a trained vocalist is going to be able to have a lot more sustainability and a lot
Yeah.
more, what's the word? Anti-fatigue. Like, you know,
Oh,
they're going to
yeah.
be able to keep it going for a lot
Stamina,
longer.
sure,
Endurance.
yeah. Endurance, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm assuming now that watching this and you know, you've inspired me. We got the chance to perform together lots of times, and you sort of inspired that drive in me to want to take care of my voice and to pay attention to how all these things work. So I'm assuming that everyone watching this is on that same train and now wants to be a trained vocalist, or at least, you know, start down that path to being a little more educated. How do we cross that bridge? What are some good ways that we can protect ourselves? Now we're talking a little more about the instrument itself versus, now we've talked about learning, and that's certainly a great necessary step. You should learn a lot about your instrument and what it is, and you know how it came about and all of that stuff. Now we know a little bit about our instrument and how it functions and that stuff. Now we want to sing and we want to perform and we want to do that. Where do we start? How do we start singing the right way, properly, protecting ourselves and making sure that we're improving without hurting ourselves or limiting our abilities?
Yeah, I mean, so some of it's just fundamental, right? Like to life, drinking a lot of water, super vital, right? So, you know, if I told you tomorrow that you're that you're going to go out and you're going to, you know, run a marathon today, you're not going to like dehydrate yourself, right? You're going to probably drink a ton of water.
I would think so.
And the vocal folds are just like any other muscle, right? They operate with the use of water. So in order to, you know, one of the biggest things is people are like, oh, well, I drank a lot of water 1 hour before I went on stage. And I'm like, that's great. You should have done it yesterday.
Yeah.
You know, one of the worst parts about this job sometimes is having to be in a van the day before a concert for like 10 hours. And I'm like, well, we're going to have to make a lot of stops.
Driving across the desert. Yeah. Full air conditioning on, driving across the desert, just as dry can be. Yeah.
I'm like, listen, we're going to have to pull over because I got to drink a lot of water.
Right,
so water is, I mean, it's vital to human life, but it's also really vital to singing. Because the more water you have, the more lubrication you have in your vocal folds in order to be able to sustain, because there has to be moisture here. You know, when people get raspy or when they get sick or, you know, whatever happens, usually that's because your vocal folds are kind of drying out.
Interesting.
So water is really, really vital in order to be able to kind of maintain the vocal instrument. As far as, you know, warm-ups. So and I'm super guilty of not doing this all the time, and I know I should. Warming up every morning is super important.
Okay.
You know, it gets the voice kind of moving. It puts you in the right kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Put you in the right range. So one of the things that happened when I was in my undergrad, I ended up having to go to speech therapy because I was having some issues. I had gotten my tonsils and my adenoids out. I had gotten my wisdom teeth out all within like a 6-month period.
Yeah.
And my voice was like, I don't know what's going on.
Forget you, buddy. I'm done.
And so and so I, you know, I had to go to speech therapy, and they were like, listen, you're speaking down here. Because, you know, one of the things that we talk about a lot is vocal fry. So, and I'm doing it right now because I'm tired and I can hear it myself doing it. And now that I'm talking about it, I can hear it. So it's going to drive me crazy. But
what is it? Yeah.
It's this thing where like we kind of talk like this and we get this kind of thing. And I don't do it consistently, but at the end of my sentences, sometimes you can kind of hear me drop into that.
Yeah.
And so it's creating too much pressure on the vocal folds, and it's a problem. So one of the things that we talk about is trying to maintain even your speaking voice. So your speaking voice, it's the same instrument.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful with your speaking voice, just like you have to be careful with your singing voice.
Interesting.
So, you know, trying to keep that maintained pitch when I'm speaking. So I actually, before I did my speech therapy, I spoke lower than I do now. So once I started my speech therapy, my speech therapist was like, well, this is why you're having pain while you're singing. Because while you're speaking, you're rubbing your vocal folds together in a way that they don't like. They're like, nope, I don't like this.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in society, some teenage girls are being told that that's kind of the way to speak, you know, like there's a stigma, and I don't know how
really?
far in the weeds we want to get with this. But
About
you know,
the
it's
like
kind
the
of,
timbre, the sound, or like how,
yeah,
what does
like
that
speaking
mean?
lower is
Okay.
more sultry. Let's use that word.
Okay. Okay.
So there's this thought that like, well, if I speak down here, it's
Mm.
gonna be, you know, and
Mm.
there's television programs where women speak like that, and
Sure,
so
yeah.
girls are emulating. And
Yeah.
I'm speaking primarily right now for females because that's what
That's
I
your
know
experience.
a little bit more.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But it goes for males too. If males are speaking kind of in that, because it's the same thing for males, right? It's more
Yeah.
macho if you speak lower.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So there's kind of this thought process for men. If I speak lower, I'm more macho. For girls, if I speak lower, it's more sultry. And that the problem with that is that when we start to do that, it's now going to translate over into our singing voice. And so we're going to have problems because you're doing things that your vocal folds don't like. They don't want you to sit in that range all the time. So, excuse me, you have to kind of retrain yourself to not speak lower than where your kind of comfortable timbre is. Wow. And that, I mean, that's getting a little bit in the weeds.
Yeah. Is that as a sort of side note for that, is that maybe that just sort of off the top of my head, is that why like Michael Jackson came to mind and his speaking voice is like exceptionally high and also his range is exceptionally high? Is that possible? Is that sort of connected in that way?
Could be, you know, it's definitely a possibility. I don't know that I could speak to it
directly. Sure. Yeah. Just sort of a thought.
It's definitely, there's definitely a correlation.
Yeah. Interesting.
So those are some kind of just really important things, but warming up in the morning can kind of help you with that, right? So if I sit down at the piano or I sit down with a, you know, if I can find, I know that there's some apps now where they have like vocal warm-ups that are really simple.
School of Rock has a really great one. As a matter of fact, we have an app called the Method app. And yeah, if you sign up and come on board with School of Rock, we have a fantastic app that includes some warm-up exercises and all kinds of stuff. It's actually assignable by your vocal instructor. So the teacher can assign you these warm-ups, and they can also play different playlists and assign different things. So there are lots of apps, and actually we have one that works really well as well.
Awesome. Yeah, that's perfect. So, you know, sitting down and just kind of getting the voice going in the morning is a great way to kind of maintain some health. You know, I was really good at that for a while, and then you know, sometimes it just drops off because life gets busy, and you know, that's how it is. But
yeah, why is it always that stuff, man? Why is it always the maintenance stuff? Why is it always the things that are the best for us that go first? Like, man, I'm having a tough day. I don't need to exercise. I don't need to eat right. I don't need to do like those are the things that are going to make you feel better, right? Yeah, those are the things that improve your quality of life. But they're always the first things that get jettisoned, man. I don't know why, and we're all guilty, or I am anyway, man. We're all guilty of that, you know.
Yeah. But I do encourage, if this is a route you want to take and you want to maintain health, that's a great way to do it, is to just start in the morning. Lip trills are like my favorite thing to do in the entire world. And a lot of people people either love it or hate it. I have a couple of voice students who I've had, and you know, one of them was like, I love lip trills. The other one was like, these are terrible.
Terrible. Yeah. Is that the buzzing sound?
Yeah. Exactly. So usually I just do it kind of on a 5-note, you know, sol, fa, mi, re, do, or do, re, mi, fa, sol, just up and down and just move, you know, from key to key, height of my range to the lowest of my range. And it just kind of gets everything moving.
Yeah.
But it gives you some pitch definition too, because you don't want to just kind of like, you know, like kind of move all there are some exercises like that, but it kind of just gives you the ability to kind of just get the whole range kind of going in the morning. And ready. And then, you know, after you're done singing, and I again am guilty of this, cool down. So it's kind of like when you are working out, right? So you do a warm-up, you do your workout, and
stretch,
you do a cool down.
Or cool down, sure. Yeah, sure, yeah.
I just skipped the whole thing.
You ought to. You really ought to be doing that. This is a side note PSA. If you're exercising or doing anything, really, you should warm up, you should do what you're going to do, and then you should cool down. Really, just about anything that you're doing. You know?
Yeah. And it's the same with singing. You know, if you've done some high intensity stuff on stage, or whatever you're doing. And afterwards, just giving your voice a chance to kind of come back to center.
Okay.
And again, lip trills are great for that. Who's anything that's kind of maintaining a vowel. For the cool down, extremes of the voice aren't necessary. It's kind of maintaining that kind of
operating range.
Yeah, your operating range, your tessitura, if you will. And that, kind of just giving yourself a moment to kind of relax. Because a lot of times, and this, I'm guilty of this, every singer, every vocalist is guilty of having tension somewhere. So, when we're singing on stage, regardless of how good your technique is, once you start to get tired, that technique starts to go. I know, and when we perform together, like at the end of shows, I'm like,
you're tired, man. Absolutely. Yeah.
Like, I don't know if I can
do a workout. It's a full-on workout. Absolutely. Yes.
So, being able to kind of bring yourself back, release some of that tension, get yourself back to center is really important. Even if it's just some breathing exercises and a few lip trills, just to kind of get yourself back. Those are vital.
So I had seen a movie a while ago, and it was about Madonna. And I forget what the movie might have been. It may actually just have been called Madonna. I don't know. It came out in the 90s. I'm old, I don't know. It came out in the 90s sometime. And we were talking about hydration and stuff too, and talking about warming up and cooling down. It made me think about this. In the movie, her manager, the person kind of steps in when she's really young, before she really gets signed or anything. And I'm sure it's dramatized for Hollywood, but she's like, before every show, you're going to start drinking tea with lemon. And after every show, you're going to start drinking tea with honey, And is there something to that at all, or a nutritional? I mean, other than like the hydration, which we talked about, and the warming up and cooling down, that kind of stuff. Like, is there like a nutritional component? Is there any like herbs that you take, or like they have those singer sprays, right? And they have like all kinds of different things. Is there anything to those supplements or some kind of regimen like that?
So tea is actually a dehydrator.
Oh.
So drinking tea before or after you sing is not a good idea.
Oh.
Yeah, which is kind of a myth, a common myth.
Yeah. Because it's warm, right? It feels like you talk about a warm up. You want something warm. You want some hot mashed potatoes and tea. I don't know.
Hot water with lemon are great because there's no dehydrating factor
with just water.
But just water. You don't need, there's definitely a psychological component. I mean, I used to take honey, right? So I would do like these big shows and I'm sucking down honey like it's my job afterwards because I'm like, oh, this is so soothing.
Yeah, feels totally good.
Psychological.
Okay.
It's
but there is a psychological
cold water
component.
That's one of the biggest things that like I'll go to a show and somebody will be like, can I get you water? And I'm like, is it cold? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, I'm good. Thank you. Or, everybody else is running, the drummer, the guitar player, the bass player, they're all running the cooler to get the water. Right. And I'm like, ooh, there's a thing of water on the side that hasn't been put in the cooler.
Yeah.
I'm going to take 5 of those.
Right. Because the cold
water is
affects,
going to shock the folds.
Yeah. Okay.
And you don't want to do that. You want warmth. So, hot water is great. Tea is not bad, but I'm not going to drink tea before I go on stage. I might drink tea the night before just to have some tea because I like tea.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, it's definitely, caffeine. Caffeine's not good. So I won't suck down a cup of coffee before.
Caffeine's also, dehydrates you and is a diuretic and can dry you out and all that. Yeah.
Definitely don't want the diuretic part.
Well, not when you're pushing them high notes, Gotta watch out for that. It's not good for you. So when we talk about warm-ups and those specific things, do you have any advice for where we can start with some of those warm-ups and how we can find out information about those? Of course, you can come to School of Rock and we were happy to set you up with a vocal instructor for a free lesson and they can talk about all that stuff. We have free demos and all that, so no cost at all. But if people want to start somewhere or they're interested, maybe they don't have access to School of Rock or something like that, then where can we go? Where can we start for some of that stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm definitely a huge proponent of a teacher. So whether it be, School of Rock or, if you're not near a School of Rock and you need to go somewhere else or whatever the case may be, I'm definitely a big proponent of teachers because you know, like I know some people are like, oh, this YouTube channel. I'm like, yeah, but how do you know who that person is? How do you know their background? And I think that's the big thing, right? If you're going to go to YouTube, or it's like we were taught in elementary school or middle school, right? If you're going to find a source, know where the source is coming from, right?
Sure, absolutely.
So like when Wikipedia first came out, you know,
Oh,
I think I was in high school and they're like, you can't use that as a source. And it's
this
like,
is, right.
you know, and
Yeah.
it's because they didn't know where the information was necessarily coming from.
We still don't know where that information is coming from. That has not changed. Yeah.
You know, but we were told go get an encyclopedia
Yeah.
because that's going to have the most accurate information, or go find a book, you know, which I
Sure.
know nowadays, like, is
Who
like,
owns a
go
book? What's a
find the
book?
treasure,
You mean with
but-
the paper and the pages and stuff?
but you know, so to me, it's like, find somebody who really knows what they're talking about and start working with them. But there are books, you know, there's like, I know one book I use is the choral approach. It's got some pretty cool warm-ups in it that you can kind of start off with. But you're going to have to be able to read music. And that's a big part of it too, is just, you know, for me personally, being able to read music is super vital. It's important because it helps you to develop. It gives you a much larger library of things that you can access because you know how to read it. If you find a warm-up that you really like and it's written on staff paper, you're going to have to know, how do I play this on the piano? You know, I'm a huge advocate of children taking piano lessons from a young age so that they can at least understand how to read the music.
Sure.
And not taking voice lessons until they're a little bit older. Some of that is just because of your development, right? Everybody goes through puberty.
Sure, absolutely.
You know? So, you know, I'm a big, you know, choirs. If you have a local choir as a child, that's great because they'll teach you how to read music. You know, those things I think are really, really important. But yeah, I mean, those are kind of, you know, there's some books that I use, like I use Vaccai is a big one, Vaccai.
Okay.
And it basically, it's all in Italian. I think it's Italian. It might be Latin. No, it's Italian.
Probably not Latin. Not a lot of people speak Latin anymore. I think the number is down to 0.
But each example takes you through different intervals. So you start off with a second, then the next one is the third, then the next one is the fourth. And in each example gets a wider interval range so that you're working on how does your voice go from here to here. And what does that feel like?
Sure.
It's in Italian. So the language is, the Italian language is great for singing because it's all pure vowels. There's no diphthongs. There's no impurities. So you're working on a, e, o, u, like the, which I know just kind of sounded, I feel like I just sounded like I was a monkey at the zoo. But.
Those are pure vowels, buddy. It doesn't get any purer than nature.
So, you know, those are, that's one book that I kind of utilize a lot with my students. Most of the exercises I've gotten have been from teachers though, and just writing them down and having those as resources. But yeah, I mean, I'm a
me too. I'm definitely, the same way. It pays always to have a mentor and someone that's been there before. And even if you do, and I'm not really anti-YouTube, as long as, again, what you're talking about, making sure that you know the source and who it is that you're learning from, and you know what is the authority that they have to teach you whatever this information is. Who are they and what have they done? There is a ton of great information out there. There's a ton of great free information. Without the ability to sort through it and know how to prioritize, you're sort of faced with this overwhelming mountain of mostly, I mean, there is a lot of great information out there. It's a large amount of great information, but it's so much that, especially when you're starting, it's like, where do I begin? How do I even start? You know, you're looking for a needle in a needle stack, you know, it's like, there's all these needles, you know, and like, you can go anywhere you want. And it's tough to figure out how to sort through all of that stuff without somebody there to guide you, you know? And
two, even as a, you know, in her 30s, because that's all I'm going to say, singer, you know, I still need help. I still need outside source, you know, absolutely. Like when I was in San Diego, I was still taking lessons from somebody because I need someone to tell me, even though I have a master's degree in this,
Yeah.
what are some of the things you're hearing? Because you can't judge yourself, right?
No.
Even if you record yourself,
it's
you
hard.
cannot judge yourself without bias.
Right.
And so to have somebody to be able to say, hey, I noticed, because, you know, tongue tension is one of my big things. I don't know why. For some reason, my tongue gets in the way of everything. It's annoying. And I have to be reminded of that. And sometimes when I'm being the lazy singer and not thinking about those things, I fall back into some bad habits. And I need someone to be like, hey, I'm hearing that tension again. You need to do some more of your, I do a lot of stick out your tongue exercises.
Oh, okay.
So like,
I do those
too. It's really annoying. And people pass practice rooms and be like, what is she doing?
I do those mostly on the freeway. Out of my way.
I'm just practicing my kiss moves, you know? So.
Right. Yeah. You want to be Gene Simmons, right? Yeah, absolutely. Don't we all?
But yeah, so I mean, but even, you know, somebody who's seasoned, you know, I know there's a lot of famous singers that still take lessons.
Yeah.
They still get outside information.
Absolutely. Well, and the other thing too, and I also take lessons, and I know many, many professional musicians who take lessons. The frequency, I think, becomes a little less when you get farther along, just because the information is so high level and it's like so specific. Like there's a lot to study in any one lesson when you get at a higher level. So they become less frequent, I think, or in general, or at least that's my experience. But you can't possibly know everything. There's no way. And it's my favorite and most frustrating thing about music. I love it. And it's also like, man, like I've learned all of this stuff. I've come all this way. I'm a professional musician. I've been performing for years and years and this and that and whatever. And whoever you are, you do not know everything, you know? So having that person that can sit in the room with you and in a very constructive and helpful way say, hey, you know, that sounds really cool. That country lick, that chicken picking thing, that finger style, that jazz, that, you know, vocal inflection or whatever it is, it's really cool. Have you heard this person that does it? Or have you heard this style that can add to that? Or have you heard this thing? You know, you can't know everything. You can't get all of that information. So having that person there to really, it's you're learning from their experience and you're learning from their sorting through years and years and years of voice pedagogy, of guitar theory, of music, of ear training, of whatever it is. You are learning from their experience.
Right. And I mean, even just, you know, there is so much music. There is no possible way that you can know everybody who's ever done anything.
No, there's no way.
And
there's actually, I saw this statistic the other day and I'm going to mess it up because I haven't seen it in a while, but there's some trillions of terabytes of videos that are uploaded to YouTube every day. In other words, to the tune of a 1 day's upload of YouTube videos would take you 1,000 lifetimes to watch. 1 day's upload of YouTube videos. So like that's the biggest understand. I mean, the fact that you can't view and see and listen to every piece of music, because music happens over time, right? So you cannot listen to that much music in your lifetime. It's not possible. Even if you listen to them constantly 24 hours a day for 100 years that you live, you would never be able to listen to all of the music and all the stuff that's out there. It's impossible.
Right, exactly. And so, you know, having people to bounce ideas off of and say, hey, have you listened to this person? And you go and you listen, you're like, oh my gosh, that's amazing. And they turn you on to something that you maybe didn't originally know. And it doesn't have to just be other vocalists, right? Like I know there's plenty of people that you've mentioned to me, you know, and I'm like, oh, cool. Like I've never heard that person and I can draw something from that. And, you know, so even just from that standpoint of just the knowledge base, the sharing of knowledge and, you know, and like you said, you know, when you get to a certain level, the frequency is a little different and the conversation's different, you know, like I know my teacher out in San Diego, we had a lot of back and forth a little bit more. It was a little bit more, you know, both people are on the stage kind of having a conversation as opposed to the player coach kind of relationship.
Yeah. The more you know, the more you can share bidirectionally, you can share with each other. And also it helps to, because once you get to a certain level, you kind of know what direction you want to go in, and you should always be open to new avenues and stuff. But at some point you do kind of pick a genre, you do kind of pick a style, you kind of pick this thing. So like I'm going in there with a specific question. Hey, I want to learn this technique. I want to learn this specific thing. I know kind of what I want to learn versus in the beginning, I didn't know even what I wanted to know. I'm just like, I want to learn music. Oh, well, cool, buddy. There's a billion different things we can do.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And for me, when I got out to San Diego, it was, hey, I've got all this classical background, but how do I apply this to other genres? How do I take this knowledge that I have and make it work, so that it doesn't sound, because one of the biggest things for me is I don't ever want to be, I don't ever want to sound like the classical singer singing pop or singing R&B. I want to be
stylistically appropriate.
Yeah. And I want, and it's, to me, it's a respect thing, right? It's a, hey, you know what? I respect that genre enough.
Yeah.
I'm going to put in the time and the effort, and I'm going to make sure I pay it some justice.
Yeah.
And I don't always succeed.
Well, the effort
my voice
is there.
has limitations, just like everybody else's.
Absolutely.
And there's some genres where my voice just does not, it doesn't work. One of the best examples for me is, Whitney Houston. I try real hard.
Sure. Yeah.
But she's at a level that's different than mine, and it's not to say that she's better or I'm better or this person's better or that person. It's just,
it's a different
instrument.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's something that, teachers of the voice have to be really mindful of. And my dog is making a lot of noise.
That's all right. He's playing a little tambourine there in the background.
Teachers have to be mindful of that. You don't have to be an opera singer in order to be a quality vocalist.
Sure.
You can be a pop singer and be extremely successful and be very talented.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the things for me. It's like, okay, well, I want to make sure when I go in and I'm learning about this genre, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure I totally understand it.
Yeah. That gets to goals and objectives too. Why are you singing this song? What is the point of what you're doing? And, how can we maximize your return on your investment? Because if you're singing this song because you're singing it to this happens a lot. And we get calls about this. I want to play a song or sing a song for my spouse, soon to be married, and we're going to do this wedding thing. And I just want to dedicate a song to them, Well, is it really beneficial for you to know that this song was written in this year, written by this person and redone by this person in this studio with these things? What is the return on investment for you there, like versus someone who is super into music, their parents were into music, they really want, they want to go on tour next year and they're practicing for this show and they have a specific goal in mind. So that also, I think, can help direct your studies and, how your teacher can help you. Because if you have a goal in mind, like, hey, I want to sing at this wedding and I want to sing this one song, cool. We can get right to the point. Really, all you need to know is this specific song and this style and how this works. And we can make that happen very quickly for you, because it's pretty simple to teach someone to sing or play or whatever one song, this specific song in this genre for this. Really, I can teach you a song in a week and you can play it at your wedding. It's not a difficult thing, So knowing what your goals are, knowing why you're here studying, or what it is that you really want to learn, that helps a lot. And that's another thing, again, that a mentor can help you with, because most of us don't start out knowing what we want. Aside from those requests that they want to learn these one-off songs and stuff, most of us are like, I just love music, or I'm connected, or I heard the Ramones album, or I heard Metallica, or I heard whatever, and like now I just am super excited about guitar, bass, drums, vocals, whatever, this instrument. And I want to learn what that sound is and how that works. And that's when an instructor is even more vitally important. Like, hey, this is cool because of this sound. They're using this effect and this is where they got that. And this is how, and all of that lineage and all that stuff. Then that's when that starts to really matter, when you really want to study it,
Right. Yeah, exactly. And and I think too, the other thing about having a teacher, they can help you focus in on where your skill sets are. I think the voice, there is an element of natural ability and natural gift, right? And so, when I was going through A school, my teacher at A school is apprentice school for the Naval School of Music.
And if you don't know what that is, I have an episode actually that I filmed. As a matter of fact, Lieutenant Hoffman is going to be on the program. Yeah, I recorded an episode. We're going to do an episode with her. And I got her to come on the program and talk a little bit about the Navy music program and military music in general. Because actually, being a military musician myself, I have a lot of friends and people that are on the show that are also in that world. So I figured it would be beneficial to talk about that a little bit. So if you don't know what that is, Stay tuned and we'll have that episode. If we haven't done it already, then we'll do it eventually. Pay attention for that episode.
Yeah. So, when I was at the school, my teacher kind of was like, okay, well, where's your, what genre would you say is your strongest, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody's going to have an area of weakness and an area of strength.
Sure.
And, she challenged me to kind of think about that. And I was like, oh gosh,
I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And she was like, I think you're kind of in that soul range, like, and not just soul is in like, the original thought process of what soul is, right?
Yeah.
It kind of envelops a little bit more than that, but just kind of that sultry, soulful, really dig in, really focused in on lyrics, that kind of thing was really where my strengths kind of played out really well. The ability to belt is one thing that I have. And so it was kind of like that too, where it's, you're doing these ballads and then there's that one note, everybody's like,
kill it.
Oh yeah. So having a teacher to kind of guide me in that direction and to guide me towards, hey, these are the kind of things I can see you doing really, really well, and giving me examples and giving me artists to listen to. Those were things that I really kind of leaned towards, because I was like, oh, okay, cool. Like I can take this and run with it a little bit,
Yeah. That's an excellent point. I mean, all of those things and more that you can get from, studying with somebody and figuring out and picking the right person to study with too, like don't think that because you start with one, start somewhere and then you can find, hey, I like this or that. And then generally instructors are pretty good about, hey, I really see you have an interest in this or a passion for this. I know this person that does that, or I know this person is really good at that. And they'll recommend you to people. Most instructors are in it to try and teach you the right things in the right way. So if they know that they can't do that, or if they are, they know there's someone better to do that, then they're often happy to make sure and point you in the right direction. It's very important. We do that. Not all schools are like that. Not all people are like that. But at School of Rock, that's definitely the way that we conduct ourselves is professional like that. If you want to learn rock and you're studying with the R&B singer or guitar player, drummer, whoever, we want to make sure you're getting to the right place and, making sure you're learning what you want to learn.
Yeah. And I mean, even just, language, right? So the teachers are different, right? So some teachers are great at being very analytical and very straight to the point. Some teachers are really good at the flowery stuff. I had teachers who would say to me, I want you to sing with more purple. And that to me was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't
purple,
think
you
abstractly.
Yeah.
Not thing. Picasso, I just, no. It's just not me, right?
Yeah.
But there's other people who are like, I know what purple is. I get it.
Sure.
And so I think that's another part of it, not just where their interests lie, but their teaching style. Because I think some students are going to learn better from some, and none of it's wrong. None of the teaching style is wrong. Right. None of the way that the student is learning is wrong. It's just sometimes teachers mesh really well with their students. And sometimes it's like, this isn't working out because we just don't speak the same language.
Right.
And, I think that's something that can help, I think that's as you get a little bit older, maybe in your middle school, teenage years, that becomes a little bit more vital.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I found that with one of my guitar heroes has always been Pat Martino. I love that guy. I think he's phenomenal. He's just an amazing guy, awesome person, great story, just inspirational. If you don't know his story, you should check it out. He's a really cool guy. So I wanted to learn his stuff. And so I started transcribing and listening to his stuff. And then I picked up a DVD of his, I think back in the day, maybe it was even a VHS. Anyway, I wanted to learn his, it was called Creative Passages or something. I forget what it was called. I put the tape in and he starts talking about trapezoids and this is like a triangular sound, and I'm like, eject. I'm just going to go back to transcribing. I don't know what you're talking about, Pat. You are a brilliant musician. I'll transcribe you all day long because then I can process it in my own way. But to that, to your point, it's just that different teachers and different people think about things in different ways, and they could be perfectly capable and great instructors and all that stuff, but maybe not able to connect with you on that level directly, the way that you speak in that language.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly. So I think those things all kind of play a role, and and just where's their skill set lie. If you want to learn contemporary commercial music and you're going to learn from one of the top opera teachers in the country, you're barking up the wrong tree, right?
Sure. Right. Yeah. You're never going to get there from there. That's not the path for you. Yeah.
Right. And you're not going to, and it might end up turning you off from the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
If you're learning from the wrong
sure
style of teacher,
right.
In whatever way, shape, or form, you're going to go, oh, I don't want to do that. And so it's like, okay, well, if that, and I've experienced it. I've had students come to me and I am classical. That is how I teach. That is my background. That is what I enjoy teaching. And that's where I personally feel the approach to start from.
Yeah.
And so, and I've had students go, I don't want to do this. And I'm like, okay, then I'm not the right teacher for you. And it's not a bad thing. It's just, I'm not the right one, and if all you want to do is come in and sing Disney songs, and that's fine.
Oh yeah.
If that's your goal.
Sure.
Then, like you said earlier, if that's your goal, that's awesome. I just might not be the right teacher for that.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, it's up to the teacher to make sure and make those calls too. Right. The understanding that the student may or may not, they may know what they want, but not necessarily how to get there. And it's really the instructor's job to be professional enough to say, hey, I'm not really the person for that, but here is the person for that. Here is, how you can start doing that stuff and point you in the right direction. That's what good educators are supposed to do, right? That's how we're supposed to do that stuff.
You hope.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Rachel, for joining me today. This has been a lot of fun, and we went all the way through, learned a little bit about your history and just some great accomplishments there, and appreciate you being on the show and then telling us, how the voice worked. I learned a few things there today. I'm going to go see if I can make sure and stay hydrated and get those folds working for me, So we learned a lot of good stuff today. And if you're interested to hear a little bit more from Rachel, she sings again with the United States Navy Band. You can check them out. They're all over the place. All you got to do is Google them and you'll be able to find some of the stuff with her singing. And then hopefully she'll come back for some workshops, maybe some camps and classes. We got to talk her into it. So we'll see how that goes and see if we can get her back on the program. So I really appreciate you coming by and chatting with us today, Rachel, and sharing your time. And if we have any questions about her, this episode, singing, music, anything, please feel free to send us an email, santaanna@schoolofrock.com, or check us out, santaanna.schoolofrock.com, and we can get you in touch and make sure they get all your answers, your questions answered. So appreciate you again, Rachel. Have a good evening, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. Sounds good.
Cool. See ya.
Bye.
School of Rock. Santa Ana.